everyone, you're very welcome to this week's episode of Parlay with podcast. Don't forget to click like, subscribe, and click the notifications bell so you don't miss any future videos and updates. This week, I'm delighted to be joined by author of Choose Life, Choose Leith, Trainspotting on Location, Tim Bell. He's a Trainspotting scholar, tour guide, and aficionado, and also a very good friend of mine who I've had the privilege of doing a personalised Trainspotting tour with. Tim, thanks a million for coming on the show this evening. It's great to see you again, albeit virtually.
Nice to be with you, Padraig. It's the best we can do.
Yeah, absolutely. The last time we met was a week before lockdown, when coronavirus hadn't really gotten into the public consciousness as of yet. So we're quite lucky. I was inspired by picking the dates. I did pick to come over, and we got to see Trainspotting, sunny Leith on location, and also managed to get in a Hibs Hearts Edinburgh derby, which we'll talk about in a while there as well.
Yeah, that was good. I remember that the last email I sent to you before I met you was, I don't think I'm COVID-19 positive, which was a reassurance I shouldn't have had to give, really, because Boris Johnson was slow to impose the lockdown. We were ahead of the game here. Never mind, that's history now.
Yeah, you didn't pass on the Scottish variant anyway, so
no,
it all came on, all worked out pretty well.
Yeah.
But it was a very timely break, and given what lay ahead of us, it was inspired. Yes. So it was really good.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this evening, Tim is very kind to come along to have a chat about the Irish influence in Trainspotting. We're going to have a chat and analyse that, which we tend to do with various messages to each other on WhatsApp. We just passed away many a boring day in lockdown and COVID, you know, so the viewers will now get an insight into our chats. And we're also just going to share, I suppose, a couple of parts of Trainspotting that both made an impact on us. But maybe just a quick chat about the environment that Trainspotting was set in and the impact of the environment that led to the Trainspotting generation.
Yeah.
So before we get stuck into it this evening, we're just going to do our usual cheers and good health. I'm hoping it won't be too long before we get to do this in person again. So cheers and good health, Tim.
Cheers and good health to you, Padraig. Hope you can come to Scotland again soon.
We've both got the same colour mugs anyway, so just want to start, I suppose, with my own history with Trainspotting myself and how my experience of the book. I remember being quite young. I was a bookworm when I was younger. I really loved books. I remember being about 10 or 11 in the local library and seeing Trainspotting, and the lady behind the counter didn't want to give it out to me to take home for fear it might be a bit disturbing to read. I think she had a point, in fairness, where I couldn't really argue with that. But when I was 19, when I was old enough, or so I thought anyway, to read Trainspotting, I got it in Cork City Centre. I was just down in Cork a couple of months for college, and I remember reading it in one sitting, pretty much straight through when I got home. If I had to pick one book that had the most effect on me, or a book that made the most impression, I would say Trainspotting, without a shadow of a doubt. It's a book I've reread it again in preparation for the interview, as well as your own book, Tim, which is fantastic encyclopedia for all fans of the book. And I suppose just your angle, on your angle, Tim, like, how did you get so interested in Trainspotting yourself?
Well, I think it's the case that if Trainspotting wasn't set in the neighbourhood in which I live, I would never have picked it up. If this was set in Dundee or Glasgow, and it might well have been, I don't think I would have picked it up. It's not my style. I mean, it's more my style now. But I picked it up, and it was fun. It was cheeky. It was truthful. It told some heroin truth, and it was fun to recognize so many familiar locations in the neighborhood, in the town, in the fiction. And I didn't think it would last or it would travel. I thought it was too topical and too local. It wouldn't last and it wouldn't travel. That was my first judgment of Trainspotting. I thought I liked the cheek, the insolence, and the honesty. And then, of course, when it got big, I was drawn into it, and people were, I was trying to make it out as a tour guide at the time, in an amateurish sort of a way. And I had an email from Netherlands asking me if I did the Nevin Welsh tour of Leith, because my business name was Leith Walks. And well, I didn't, but I researched it and I did. And it turned out to be all Friday evening and the following morning on Saturday with 6 journalists from Netherlands. And I got right into it at that stage. And I thought, this is a book that needs an interpretation, because the heroin story is universal, but it has to happen somewhere. And it always happens in somebody's family. Yeah. So it is universal. It's its topicality and its locality, which I thought were limitations at the time. Actually, they turned out to be strengths and virtues, because this is where and how and why the heroin story takes place, wherever it does, in your neighborhood, in this neighborhood, wherever.
Very good. How long have you been doing the tour guides for? When did you start?
Well, that was 2003 or 4, I think. And I'm not really doing it now. Actually, just the latest is that there's a chap from Invisible Cities. That's a charity that helps people with various difficulties. It might be homelessness, it might be an acquaintance with addiction, whatever. Setting themselves up as tour guides. And there's a chap who I'm supporting him. He speaks from the heart, from personal experience, about how he's experienced homelessness and a wee bit of addiction in his case. And he needs to get his content sorted and his presentation, but he's right up with the gizmo. You can order a tour from him and do it from the comfort of your own home in Cork or California or wherever you are, and he'll have a gimbal. He'll have the camera on a gimbal, and he's talking into the microphone as he's walking along, and he'll say, right, we're approaching Leith Central Station now. And there you are, it's on your screen.
Very good.
So it's a worthy cause, and I'm too old for the tour guiding now. I'll do the odd one. I've got one coming up next week for a couple from England. But
one thing that you are continuing to do, though, I suppose, is speak about the effects of the Trainspotting generation, the phenomenon, and analysing it. And on that note, there's an upcoming presentation on Facebook on the 12th of November, which I'm going to put the link for in the video description once it's up. Just like the European Championships, it's a year late, Leith 2020 HQ, the Trainspotting phenomenon, and it marks the 100th anniversary of Leith and Edinburgh amalgamating together.
That's right.
Against the wishes of the majority, which we're going to touch on as well.
Yes. In that presentation, I'm concentrating on the way in which Leith had been demolished and dispersed and disrespected. And I repeat the old heroin adage: if you've got a life, you don't need to do heroin. But if there are gaps in your life, heroin will find the gaps, and there are lots of gaps in Leith community and personal lives in the 1970s and 80s, and heroin found a natural home in this devastated community. I mean, that can happen in any devastated community. Heroin can happen anywhere, but it finds a natural home where there are gaps. People take heroin because it's seductive and available, and you might as well prohibit sex as prohibit drugs. If it's available, young people will use it because it's seductive. And sex is subject to all sorts of health education and various other measures, damage limitation, support, all sorts of things. But the seductive illegal drugs are not, they don't get proper education around it, because the substance is illegal, which makes it a big no-no for polite society and education authorities to address it properly. The biggest single most helpful thing to do about heroin would be to take the criminality out of it. In fact, just remove the marketplace, more to the point, because it's being pushed from Afghanistan. Afghanistan has got many problems, and heroin was only one of them. But heroin is part of the problem in Afghanistan. That's where the money is. Where do you think the Taliban get the money from? And it's pushed as a business proposition around all the markets on the world. And it's the illegality of the marketplace that sustains this sort of the failure and refusal of mainstream society and politicians to address the issue. This stuff is available. Doesn't matter whether it's illegal or not. It's available. Youngsters will use it and experiment. And heroin is highly addictive, and it goes wrong, and it ruins lives.
You made a very good point in your book that the heroin HIV epidemic was a result of a collision between two human habits, sex and drugs.
Yes.
And it was just a disaster, catastrophe combined.
HIV was first most strongly associated with the gay community, and it was in Muirhouse, which is not Leith. It's Muirhouse is a 1960s housing scheme 3 miles west of Leith, and a lot of Leith people ended up there. So there are strong links between Leith and Muirhouse. But a doctor a GP, family doctor in Muirhouse, Dr. Robertson, he's a hero of modern times. He did an analysis of several heroin abusers, intravenous drug abusers, more to the point they were injecting. That was the point. And he saw a small majority of them were HIV carriers, which changed the demographic from HIV being carried by gay men to intravenous drug abusers. And that discovery, it wasn't, Dr. Robertson's discovery in 1986, I think that was major. It changed perceptions. So around HIV anyway, it didn't change perceptions around heroin.
I coincided my trip over to Edinburgh with the night of the Edinburgh Derby between Hibs and Hearts. I was inspired to go to the game from reading Irvine Welch's books. There's one chapter in Trainspotting where a Hibs and Hearts match is played, where the guys go to it on New Year's Day. So I decided to give a shout out to Tim's friend Trond, who helped sort out a ticket for that game.
He's a shareholder. No, not a shareholder, a member. Yeah, season ticket holder. That's what he is.
Very good. Yeah. No, it was appreciated. It really added to the occasion, and being in the Harp and Castle after the game, the locals were very, very welcoming to an Irish tourist. In particular, I spent a bit of time with two guys, Ian and Andrew, that I'm in contact with.
Good.
Over a year and a half later. So I hope you're both well, guys. So just an interesting stat as well. I've been to 2 Scottish football matches in my life. Celtic and Hearts in 2007 in Parkhead in Glasgow, and the one in March 2020, which was mentioned there. And both of them were 3-1 wins for Hearts. So a bit of a coincidence. I'm hoping to buck that trend when I'm coming over in a couple of months for Celtic and Hearts again at Parkhead. But if anyone from Hearts Football Club or Hearts McLeod Football Club is watching, want to give me free tickets, I'm very open to offers, because my record is quite good.
I'm putting money on a 3-1 win for the Hearts.
Yeah, my track record could lightning strike 3 times? Who knows? But
I should have. We were emailing and WhatsApping just before the World Cup started, and I said I'm going to put money on England losing the final, and you said I put money on them England losing the final after penalties, and I couldn't get a price for it, but I wish I'd tried a bit harder. That would have been a good one.
Yeah, there would have been a few quid in that. I should mention as well that Tim, contrary to his name, which you'd imagine would be a Celtic supporter, is actually a Jambo. He's a fan of Hearts. So
I'm a Newcastle United man before I'm a Jambo.
Yeah, congrats to the new owners. That must be.
Let's not go there, buddy.
Okay, not. You're in the minority of unhappy Newcastle fans at the minute, I'd say, but that's fair. So, on our tour, one of the first things you said, and I think kind of struck a chord and laid a template for a key point of your book as well. We met at the shore where Spud is sitting outside on a bench at the beginning of a chapter. And one of the first things you said was, this is Leith and Edinburgh is down there. And you made that point very clear. Leith is Leith, Edinburgh is Edinburgh.
That's right.
Could you maybe elaborate, maybe explain to people?
Well, I mean, all the capital cities in the British Isles are in the southeast of that country: Dublin, Cardiff, London, and Edinburgh. And they've all got their medieval fortresses, strongholds right on the coast, except Edinburgh. Edinburgh's castle is about 3 miles away from the shore, and Edinburgh Castle always needed access to the sea. And they controlled it for the medieval period and well beyond, down to 1820 something or other. And then Leith became a separate independent municipality, and it developed a huge sort of civic pride. And in 1920, it was the municipalities were amalgamated, Leith and Edinburgh. Leith was completely surrounded by municipal Edinburgh, and administratively it was just a little bit of timely tidying up of the civil administration, but it went against the wishes of the people, and it was always a sore point, the amalgamation.
Yeah.
Right.
You made a point in the book that when people were getting on the bus out to Leith, that people would only relax when the bus had passed Pilrig.
Yes.
There was this kind of a general mistrust of Edinburgh folk.
Well, Leith was just a close-knit community. It really was, right? I mean, the amalgamation went ahead in 1920, but right, for another 50 years or more, Leithers were Leithers. But it was being, but this happened to deindustrializing city centre areas all over. It was the Gorbals in Glasgow was happening to the same. The areas were being demolished and the communities dispersed and disrespected. And Biker on the Tyne, and Leith was no different from any of them. But it hurt in Leith because there was a very distinctive and very proud, particular Leith community and Leith community spirit. And it really hurt, and it's been resented.
Yeah, I suppose there is kind of the element of the outsider about people from Leith, I'd say, compared to the rest of the city, would you say?
Yeah. People from Glasgow come to Leith and say they're much more at home in Leith than they are in Edinburgh. It's Edinburgh and Glasgow are very different. And Glasgow has more in common with Leith than with Edinburgh. You know, it's a generality, of course.
On the rest of walking up from the shore after that, then we saw Cable's Wind House, which Owen Postman knows it as that. It's famously known as the Banana Flats, home of Sick Boy, the fictional Sick Boy in Trainspotting.
Sick Boy, that's home of Sick Boy, yes. And I think I introduced you to. I gave Sick Boy's manifesto in front of the Banana Flats. Will I read that from Trainspotting now?
Yeah, go on. Yeah, why not?
Yeah. This is Sick Boy's manifesto. Some fucking friends I have: Spud, Second Prize, Begbie, Matty, Tommy. These punters spell limited, an extremely limited company. Well, I'm fed up to my back teeth with losers, no hopers, draft packs, schemies, junkies, and the likes. I'm a dynamic young man, upwardly mobile and thrusting. The socialists go on about your comrades, your class, your union, and society. Fuck all that shite. The Tories are going to go on about your employer, your country, your family. Fuck that even more. It's me, fucking me, Simon David Williamson, numero fucking uno versus the world. And that's just a little bit of Thatcherite ideology coming through in a fictional character. It's good writing. That's part of what commends Trainspotting, not just as an expose of heroin scene, but as a broad diary of British life. Mrs. Thatcher was saying, fuck the comrades, your class, your union society, fuck your employer, your country, your family, fuck that even more. It's me, fucking me.
Yeah.
And you know, she said there's no such thing as society, and she also said greed is good, and Sick Boy is just a child of Thatcher.
Yeah, he personifies that, absolutely.
Yeah.
So other places we saw on the tour was the Corkgate Shopping Centre, which you're not a fan of.
Well, it's a 1960s shopping mall. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, I've seen prettier buildings now, to be honest.
But the Kirkgate, that's a medieval name for the street. The street's been there all those years, and they just knocked the hell out of it. Put all there were shops along the whole length of it, and they and they knocked them all down. They put them into a shopping centre at the bottom of the walk, at the foot of the walk, and made a terrible little sort of modern terraced, low block, modern 1960s shapeless housing scheme. I don't want to speak ill of the place. Decent people live in there, you know. It is, you know. Yeah, I mean, the character of the Kirkgate was just knocked out. But I mean, did this happen in the Republic of Ireland? Not on the same scale, perhaps. After the war in the 1950s and 60s, this was going on. It was a social movement, together with the fact that they discovered concrete, which permitted new shapes. And so they did new designs and new constructions. But they haven't lasted very well. 50% of the new builds of the 1960s demolitions, you know, 50% of the new 1960s buildings have not lasted half a century, which calls into question whether they were ever fit for human habitation. And it also calls into question whether there were any sort of investment for the future. What sort of return on money was that?
Yeah, the varicose veins flats and that, yeah. At the foot of the walk, there is a statue of Queen Victoria, which Bud affectionately calls Sticky Vicky in the book.
Yes.
Can you maybe give a bit of background as to why, how that nickname was earned?
When I was once doing a tour, and I said, with some Leith girls, and I said, you know, we came to Queen Victoria statue, and I said, I'm not from Leith, you understand? I've only lived here 40 years. And I said, this is Queen Victoria, and I said something. Spud calls Queen Sticky Vicky, and the girl said to me, "Do you not know?" And I said, "Do I not know what?" And they said, "Well, see all those references in the book to Benidorm. Begbie goes to Benidorm, and I think Sick Boy goes. And there was a Queen Sticky Vicky in Benidorm. She was a nightclub act. She got herself naked and produced an astonishing range of solid objects from her vagina. And her name was Queen Sticky Vicky. So to call Queen Victoria Queen Sticky Vicky is a clear association with Benidorm. The sheer insolence, man. It's fun. It's good.
Speaking of insolence, I suppose I paid my own tribute to Queen Victoria.
You did?
The Irish in me. I stuck 2 fingers up at Sticky Vicky, no pun intended. Long before dissing statues became a trend in late 2020. So I'm a bit of a pace setter. I got him there early, you know. But,
well, you did. It's the Irish in you. So you're entitled, I think.
Yeah. She let us starve to death, so you know, I'm sure we can. I'm sure she get over a couple of fingers, like, you know. After that, we went down to the Central Bar, scene of Mark Renton's celebration when he was off for shoplifting. We went in. One of my favorite parts after that, we went into the Persevere or the Percy Bar, and we read out the scene from Nana and Other Nazis, the chapter where they encounter an orange walk, and the orange walk and racist orange folk BNP.
That, I mean, I'll read that section out if you like. I mean, this is another part in which Trainspotting is commended not just as an expose of the heroin scene and HIV, but also as a broad diary of certainly Leith life in the 1980s. The Orange Order staged their annual march, Edinburgh March, just around the corner from the pub where we met. And Spud Murphy, I mean, you know, come on. He meets up with his mixed race uncle, Dode, who's the product of his grandmother and a West Indian seaman, seaman, as he nicely puts it. And so this Spud Murphy and the mixed race uncle go into the Persevere bar where we were when the Orange Order are in there drinking, and the party doesn't get such easy permission to march as the Orange Order, and they often like to turn up on Orange March days for a march out with like-minded people. So there's the BNP in there as well. And I'll read out the passage if you like. It turns out that Mark Renton's father is a lapsing Orangeman himself. No story, no portrait of Leith in the 1980s would be complete without this sort of episode. I mean, it's fiction, but it's plausible enough. You know, there's no need to doubt the authenticity of the main issues in play here. Anyway, me and Doug decide to hop on down to the Percy for a pint. The pub's a wee bit crazy. Normally the Percy is a quiet family type pub, but it's mobbed out today with these orange cats for the Wild West, he means Glasgow, who are through here for the annual march and rally at the links. These cats, it has to be said, have never really bothered me, but I can't take them. It's all hit like she can. Celebrating old battles seems like she well pretty does. Ken. I see Rentz's old man with his brothers and nephews. Rentz's father, Billy, he's there and all. Rent's old boy's a soap dodger in the Paris Bun, means Rangers man. But he's not really into this sort of gig anymore. His family for Glasgow sure are though, and his family seem to matter to Rentz's papa. Rentz doesn't hit it off with these cats really. Doesn't like talking about them. Different with Billy though. He's into all this orange stuff, this sort of jambo on gig. He gives us a nod for the bar, but I don't think the cat really digs us. But we're in the vicinity of some unsound looking cats. Some are skinheads, some aren't. Some have Scottish, others English or Belfast accents. One guy's got a Screwdriver t-shirt on. Screwdriver is a punk band with nationalist associations. Another likes he's wearing an Ulster British top. They start singing a song about Bobby Sands, slagging him off like, say, I don't know much about politics, but Sands to me seems like a brave dude, like, never killed anybody. Like, say, it must take courage to die like that. Then one guy, the Screwdriver dude, seems frantically trying to gaze the eye, gaze the stare as desperately as we're trying to avoid eye contact, like say. It's not that easy. When they start singing, "Ain't no black in the Union Jack," English accent, we stay cool. But this cat will not be denied. His claws are hurt. He shouts, "Order, Dod, Dod. Oi, what are you fucking looking at, nigger?" "Fuck you." Dod sneers. "It's a route the cat's travelled down before. No me though. This is like say fucking heavy. I hear some Glasgow boys saying these guys like say aren't they real orange when they're Nazis and that. But most of the orange bastards present are lapping these cunts up, encouraging them like say. They'll start singing, "You black bastard, you black bastard." And Dod gets up and goes over to the table. I just see Screwdriver's mocking, distorted face change when he realizes at the same time as I do that Dod's got a heavy glass ashtray in his hand. This is violence. This is bad news. And of course, it all ends badly. That, as I say, that was part of Leith life in the 1980s. There was no significant orange presence in Leith normally. There was no lodge, no battalion. But the Edinburgh March found it convenient to rally at Leith Links, just around the corner from the pub there, and march up Leith Walk.
There's a quote I have about Orangemen here, which I think kind of sums up the complexities of the whole situation. And it's, "Orangemen are Irishmen who, in order to be taught Englishmen, march dressed as Scotsmen in honour of a Dutchman as a jester Ulsterman," which is hard to refute, really. But the last bit there, when it all kicks off in the fight, one says to the other to kill that Fenian bastard, meaning Spud. They know his Irish descent or whatever. So you can tell sectarianism was very, very prominent. Sectarian and racism were two. Yes.
Yeah, one of the things that Spud says in the book, you know, there's this idea that Jock Tamson's bairns, you know, all Scotsmen live here. All Scotsmen living here are equal. They're all Jock Tamson's bairns. But there's this myth that there's no racism in Scotland. Well, Spud knows differently, not just on his own behalf, but on behalf of his mixed race uncle.
Yeah. After we were in the Percy, we walked past the park where Irvine Welsh used to live, and the scene where Sick Boy shot the dog out the window in Wellington Place. And we wrapped up the night in the Leith Dockers Club. It was getting dark at this stage, in the Leith Dockers Club. And I'm glad to say we didn't have watered down tartan special as a Sick Boy thought Rinton would be having, but some nice points of tenants which went down well. And quite aptly, there was bingo on in the Dockers Club that night, just like in the book as well.
Just so like in the book, yeah.
It was a very authentic, and reading out scenes from the book as well. It really topped it up and rounded off the trip to Edinburgh brilliantly. And I'm looking forward at some stage to revisiting those places again.
Well, I mean, I think you had a nice welcome in the Dockers Club, didn't you?
Well, someone made a comment that you weren't allowed to wear football colours, and
I see. I bet you.
As we're on the same top I have on now, the green top. And someone said that to you, indirectly to me via you, you know. So.
Oh, I didn't catch that one actually. Well, they've got their reasons. They've got their reasons.
No, I'd say they have, yeah, but I know they seemed nice folk, right? They seemed to be good spirit in there as well. So I suppose one of the things we're going to discuss in the podcast this evening is the Irish influence on Trainspotting, and we've kind of touched on it a bit there with the in that chapter. But Leith was kind of unique in Scotland in the sense it was one of the few areas that had a reputation for good inter-community relations with Irish immigrants, in contrast to many other areas in Scotland, particularly in Glasgow, where a lot of, which still feeling the effects of today, we'll say, sectarianism. So there was a plaque quite near the Banana Flats there above Anderson's pub in honour of the Irish people who, and it was one of the few contemporary positive acknowledgements of the contribution that the Irish
Yes.
made, Scotland.
Yes.
Maybe just,
Yes.
I'm going to put in images of it there so that people can see it, but can you just describe the plaque and I suppose
Well, yes,
stuff?
it's a fine piece of work. I think it's dated 1885, and it's on a new build. It was a slum clearance area in 1885, and I don't know if this plaque was put there as a mark of the Irish labourers who built it, or that the Irish were going to be the principal occupants there. There would be council tenants, of course. But it was the first secure accommodation that many of these Irish immigrants had. And it's a nice plaque with the thistle on the top to tell you where you are. And then Irish side, either side, there's the shamrock, and then there's the harp in the middle. And it leaves you no doubt about the harmonious relations and the positive acknowledgement of the Irish community. Yeah, and it's good. And then the other significant factor about the Irish contribution to the life of Leith broadly was the fact that in the Catholic Church, Stella Maris, the presbytery house there was built in 1860 something, I think, and it was the first presbytery house for Catholic men built in Scotland since the Reformation, and it's still there.
It kind of gave beleaguered Scottish Catholics a boost.
It did.
Immigrants,
Right.
like.
I mean, and the Irish brought over a well-educated and confident priesthood, and it was a big boost, and it's worked well. Hibernian Football Club is a child of not just the broad Irish community, but the Catholic Church. The direct associations go back to the Cowgate. Father, what was his name? Hannon, was it? But I mean, they had equally good relations with Stella Maris and Leith, and Easter Road Stadium is neatly equidistant between Little Ireland, which was the Cowgate in Edinburgh, and Stella Maris, and they would have the club meetings in one of the church halls or the other. It didn't really matter which. Yeah.
So Hibernian is Latin for Ireland.
Yeah.
So like the name is Irish.
They were going to call Glasgow, the club that ended up being called was going to be called Glasgow Celtic in deference to the senior club founded in Leith.
Glasgow Hibernian.
Yeah, the Glasgow Hibernian, I mean, yes.
Yeah.
But Glasgow, the Glasgow club went professional, and they started poaching Irishmen from the Leith club, and that was thought to be a terrible thing to do within the Irish community, but there was a nice moment, I think, in the mid-1880s when there was a clause in the constitution of Hibernian Football Club that their players had to be Irish-born and Catholic, and the Scottish Football Association said bluntly that they didn't like that clause. The Scottish Football Association was for Scotchmen. So they put the club out for a year till they got rid of that clause. And then they came back, and they played a creative part in the foundation of modern Scottish club football.
Absolutely, and are an older club than Glasgow Celtic as well.
Yeah, an older club than Glasgow, yeah. Glasgow Celtic.
So in Trainspotting, the novel, that connection with Ireland is very much seen in the chapter Victory on New Year's Day, when they're getting ready, they're having a party, and I think it's just before they go to a Hibs Hearts game. It's just before
the New Year's Derby, yeah.
New Year's Derby, yeah. So Wolf Tone songs like Bannistrand, off to Dublin in the Green, with extra sectarian lyrics like off to Dublin in the Green, fuck the Queen, where the bayonets glisten in the sun, where the bayonet slashed the orange sash, to the echo of the Thompson gun. Is a tribute to James Connolly as well.
Yes.
Who Gav describes as a fucking great highbie, a fucking great rebel, great soldier.
But that was correct. He was a hippie.
Yeah, he was born in Cowgate.
Although he was born not in Leith. Was he Irish born or Edinburgh born? I'm not sure. He was certainly brought up in Edinburgh, not Leith, at Little Island, which is the Cowgate.
Yeah, he was born in Cowgate, I believe. Yeah,
I believe he was, yes. But he was Irish, and well, he was an internationalist and a socialist.
One of the leaders of the 1916 Rising as well.
Yes,
and
yes.
so you can see the emotion. There was My Size when James Connolly's song was sung, so you could see the Irish identity was very strong with those songs, like they were being sung.
And this was just sort of, I mean, I don't think that the singing was particularly to do with the upcoming Hibs Hearts derby. I think it was just sort of rebelliousness of youth and high jinks of a New Year's Day. And these are the best rebellion songs that they know. And there's just a strong Irish streak in them. And they sing some Irish stuff as well after Tommy's funeral. And there's nothing Irish in the fiction, but when in the wake in the pub afterwards, some of the singing turns to Irish singing, and there's no context in the fiction for it, but it just turns up, and it's likely enough. It was plausible.
There is irony with the song "The Boys of the Old Brigade" that everyone joins in and sings that song. Even Sick Boy takes a break from his necking session when he was a jazz purist with his conquest to join in. So it's assumed that Renton also sings as well.
Yeah, well, presumably, yeah.
And at the end of two key words, I suppose, when being just a lad like you, I joined the IRA, and then provisional wing was added in.
Yes. Yes, I didn't spot that. I didn't spot that when I was writing my book. I didn't spot that addition. And you pointed it out later. Yeah,
the addition of adding that really makes it modern. And yes, I suppose the provisional IRA were only formed in the early 70s. So I suppose it was a direct.
It was. I suppose in a way, in this context, it was anti-Thatcher. Mrs. There was an anti-Thatcher element. Dick Gaughan was Leith's most musical son of the period, and he used to sing these rants against Mrs. Thatcher and supporting the IRA and all this. Yeah.
But I suppose adding in the provisional wing, they made a distinction between the old IRA, from back at the time it would have been originally set, which would have been around 1916, 1921 period, to make it more modern. So they showed their sympathy. But of course, we know that Mark's brother Billy dies at the hands of the provisional IRA.
Well, no, that whole chapter there, Bang to Rights, when it's Billy's funeral, there's the whole issue of Billy is Mark Renton's older brother who joins the army, and he gets deployed in Northern Ireland. He gets shot up at Crossmaglen, and a lot of soldiers did. He wasn't the only one. And at the funeral, his orange rallies turn up from Glasgow. And there's this big debate going on in Renton's mind at the funeral. Was his brother a hero who died for his country, or was he a prick in a uniform? And he could see the Irish. I mean, it wasn't a declared war. It was a civil emergency in which the army was deployed. So it's a bit of a stretch to say he was a hero who died for his country. It wasn't a declared war. And then
he was a casualty of imperialism, really, wasn't he?
My take on the partition is that it was the biggest piece of misgovernment within the British Isles in the 20th century. And I mean, we've had some misgovernment, but that must have been the biggest. And 100 years on, we're still living with the consequences. It should have been discussed and negotiated and planned for, but it was just done at the stroke of a pen. And oh, dear me, you've got to be more careful about these things.
With the Brexit protocol and all that, it's still serious. Like 100 years later,
London and doesn't know and doesn't care about about Ireland, and it doesn't much care about Scotland either. They could well, the present British government could well oversee the breakup of the union. I don't think Scottish independence is likely in any time soon, to be honest with you. I think, yes, we won't get off the subject here, but the case for Scotland going solo, away from its nearest neighbours, in the way that the SNP fondly imagines, is very speculative, and it's not secure enough to really make a big policy decision on yet. That's my analysis. And the lesson of Ireland, I mean, I'm across, my home village is just a kick of the ball down from the border stone on the English side. Border's on a hilltop. And my home village is 10 miles down on the English side. But I've lived here 40 years. So I don't know if I'm English or Scottish. It depends who's asking.
I suppose just to finish off, Billy dies. I suppose the opinion, it's assumed that Mark Rinton would have sang along with that song, the Boys of the Old Brigade, before the Hibs and Hearts game. But I suppose he can't condone their tactics.
That's right.
Says that he can't. He's no illusions about them as freedom fighters. That they made his brother into a pile of catshit. They were cunts as well, basically.
Yeah.
Another reference, I suppose, and one that not many people have got, is the one to Gary McKay. When Johnny Swan is lying with his leg's been amputated from shooting heroin into it. So literally he says, promising football career up the creek, still it never stopped. Gary McKay did it, implying that Gary McKay had one leg.
Aye.
I'm not sure which leg he was referring to, but his left leg scored the goal which sent Ireland to Euro 88. Scotland beat Bulgaria 1-0. And Ireland needed Scotland to win, essentially. So Gary McKay became a national hero in Ireland for quite some time. Afterwards, still bought drink in Ireland whenever he comes over as a result of that goal. But I was in researching the interview, I saw an interview with Jack Charlton around that time, and he got a phone call, and he was watching the match on TV, and there was half an hour gone, and the guy on the phone says to him, "Congratulations," and he said, "For what?" He said, "For qualifying for the Euros." I said, "I'm watching it here, and there's only half an hour gone, and it's 0-0. But apparently the game was delayed by an hour on the TV pictures coming across that actually was finished by the time the phone call was made. So he was given a spoiler, a welcome spoiler for the rest of the game, like he knew this.
Very good.
That was a nice reference. I'm not sure if Irvine Welsh meant to honour Gary McKay for that reason, but it's still an Irish connection that I spotted that we can put in.
Oh, well, there you go. He was just a prolific goal scorer for the Jambos. And with, what do you call him? Johnny Robertson, what was his name? Anyway, they were a little duo. And
Spud wears a Republic of Ireland top on the way down to London.
Yeah.
Yeah. It would have been fashionable to have worn a Republic of Ireland top around that time. If we were assuming that Trainspotting took place, that scene in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, Ireland would have been in Euro 88 and got to the quarterfinals of the World Cup in 1990, and there was just mass hysteria in Ireland for the national football team, helped largely by the granny rule that Jack Charlton brought in. Or exploited by bringing on players to play for Ireland who had an Irish grandmother or grandfather or that, but they were really good times for the Irish football team, so that's maybe a tribute. When they're in London, it's mentioned they're going to see the Pogues gig in Finsbury Park.
That's right, yes.
Guys with Celtic jerseys. And I think a around in London. Brenton thinks he's going to be mugged by a couple of them when he's got the bag with £16,000 in it.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to mention about the Pogues is that like they represent a lot of people, the Irish diaspora abroad. You know, like the Pogues are an Anglo-Irish band as such. Like most of them are from London, but they're London Irish. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So they may have Cockney accents, but they're very much identify as Irish people.
Sure.
Their songs sing of immigration. You know, maybe the loneliness of being away from home, as an example. But the Irish identity is very strong with them. I think it's no accident that that's the band that the guys are going to see and that are mentioned a few times, you know, in the book.
That's right, yeah. The chap who told me that when he lives on Duke Street, where the Orange Marchers were marching down, and he would throw his window open and play U2 and Planksty while the Orange men were going past as loud as he could out the open window, just to annoy them. And he's a London Irish guy. He's got a right London accent, but his heart's all Irish.
It's funny that the Irish tribe abroad in different countries, they can be more patriotic than someone who's been in Ireland all their lives, you know.
Oh, yes. There's nobody more Scottish than a London Scot.
One thing you mentioned as well in the book was about you mentioned the minister's wife crossed the road once in an orange march. Do you want to tell us what happened there?
Well, I was just talking with the minister. I went to see him, and in fact, his wife, who nipped across smartly between the marching units, and the one approaching her, she wasn't interfering with them, but they just howled out at her, "Fenian bastard!" I mean, the minister's wife. My goodness me! Reformed church minister's wife, Fenian bastard. And I was after I'd written the book, I'd finalized it, and I was talking with a chap in the Dockers Club, and he said he was out walking with his wee boy on the links when the Orangemen were assembling for their rally, and they weren't drinking in the pub at that particular moment, and they were standing around in a group, and his wee boy was on his bike, and he got a bit close to them, not really. I mean, he was only wee, for goodness sake. And they turned around and they said, "Fenian bastard."
Yeah.
And they, that's Monaghan, Ricky Monaghan is Spud's friend in the fiction, who walks up, and Spud calls him his Fenian fellow fighter, or something
Freedom
like that.
fighter, yeah.
Yeah, freedom fighter, yes.
Yeah.
Right.
So, to be sure.
It was. I mean, I don't know anything about Irish politics, and I just know a little bit about Irish history that I've mugged up for the purposes. But all this stuff spills over into Leith, and Glasgow too, I suppose, more than it does in Leith. And it's present in the book, and in the book Trainspotting, and it's an authentic part of Leith life of the period, which is a surprise to the middle class readership of books. You know, the great book buying public aren't familiar with this culture.
Even the name Spud Murphy kind of indicates like poor Catholic Irish, you know, because the Spud obviously is a nickname from the potato famine for poor Irish immigrants.
But I say for myself in the following sentence, I say, after several generations of universal education, Spud Murphy does not spell poor Irish Catholic anymore.
No, but as you say, perceptions can linger. I think there was probably parts of that that were quite stereotypical.
Oh, yeah, I mean, there's no doubt about it. I mean, Spud says in the book, in that passage about the business in the Persevere pub, he says his grandmother's first husband was a chancing old cowboy from County Wexford.
Yeah, who usually disappeared when she became pregnant.
Yeah, he would disappear every time she was pregnant.
That sounds an Irish man, all right. So it's like the joke of the group of Irish guys who approach a group of Australian girls in a nightclub in Sydney and asked if they got any Irish in them.
Yeah.
They replied no, and the response was to that, "Would you like some?" You know. I think we kind of had a name for being kind of womanizing and charmers.
Would you like me to tell you a true story about an Irishman I know? I used to know. I think he was from Cork, and he lived in that 1860-something presbytery house, and he was a priest in the Stella Maris. And the priests of the stuff right down to the 1960s, you know, now they've got other people in. But anyway, I used to be the port chaplain in Leith. I used to go up and down the gangways of the incoming ships. And I got very with some of them when they were frequent visitors. And there's a bunch of Filipinos on a ship that was coming in from Russia every fortnight. And they were in for 2 or 3 days, and they got to know me very well. And and they asked if there was any chance I could arrange for a mass to come on board, you see. So I phoned up the Presbytery House, because they've got phones in now, oh yes. And Father Tony, I think he's from Cork, somewhere thereabouts. He said, oh, certainly he would come. So I went to pick him up at the appointed time, and I took him onto the ship in the docks, which is a restricted area. He wouldn't get in there normally. And while he was togging up in the mess room before the mass, he said, one of the things he said was, you know, it's awfully nice if you to invite me, boys. You know, I've never been on a ship before. And and then he took the mass, and they made a little buffet for us, and it was one of the best 2 or 3 hours I ever spent as a chaplain, because we raised those guys' spirits and horizons more than we could ever have done. They're prisoners on board for months on end, and they don't see any other community or society or anything like this. So anyway, we had a wonderful time, and not a drop of the good stuff passed our lips, I promise you. And we were coming away, and it was unloaded. It was going to sail, and so the ship was high in the water. Then the gangway was quite steep, and he was in front of me. And at the top, I said, "That was wonderful, Father Tony. By the way, you're a wee fibber, so you are." I said, "You have so been on a ship before. You're Irish. How do you think you get here?" And he never said anything. He just waited for me at the bottom of the gangway, and we walked across the dock towards the van to go home. And he took my elbow, and he said, seriously, he said, "You know, you could be right, Tim. You could be right, but you need to understand. Do you see, when I'm running backwards and forwards between Ireland and Scotland, sure, I'm straight into the bar. I can't be certain those things are ships." There you go. Trainspotting, there we go, is a broad diary of Leith in the 1980s. And the Irish element is an honestly told part of it. You know, there's the singing, there's the question of whether the Irish, the Operation Banner, as it was called, was a fight for the country, or for what it was, whether the soldiers were pricks in uniforms. There's that whole discussion, and then there's that whole business in the Persevere pub, where there's naked racism and bigotry, orange bigotry against Catholics. Yeah, well, there you go. It's part of Leith, and it's part of Trainspotting.
I think one of the key things we both like about Trainspotting is that history and geography are kind of spliced together brilliantly.
Yeah.
And I think you can really see the influence of James Joyce on Welsh's writings, like that. There's parts of Trainspotting that are quite similar to Dubliners, kind of collection of short stories. There are an influence, I would say, there. Would you agree with that?
I don't know James Joyce very well. The walk down from Leith Central, from Waverley Station in Edinburgh City Centre, down Leith Walk to Leith Central Station, that was just about demolished. That is very similar to Stephen Dedulus' walk in Dublin. You know, all the pieces that are mentioned, the places that are mentioned in the fiction are there in reality, and you can revisit them, and including Tommy Younger's pub. That's another subject. How he puts the fiction on location, and he makes the location speak for itself and do tricks. The foot of the walk is a central place, and the demolition of Leith Central. And Trainspotting is a crazy name for a book with this content. It's nothing to do with spotting trains, but it's to do with the demolition of Leith Central Station, which had real potential to be something really big. But that's another story. That's another subject.
Yeah, Trainspotting as well is kind of another term for an anorak, for someone who kind of
before Evan Welsh reused it, the word train spotting is spotting trains. Yeah.
So the two of us.
It's for somebody who's obsessively in that sort of detail. What number the train is, what the driver had for breakfast and all that. Is he running to time? Is he running to time? Is he running late?
Yeah, the two of us are train spotters of Trainspotting, so potentially could be argued. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to read out a selection of quotes from Trainspotting that kind of struck a chord with me.
Yeah.
Some of them are quite slapstick as well, but the sharpness in how they're delivered, that always kind of connected and that I've always remembered. So I was going to share them, and maybe you can give your reaction to them, and maybe if you've got a few of your own as well afterwards when I'm finished, we can do the same. So this is the very first sentence that Sick Boy speaks in Trainspotting, and it kind of sets the tone for how obnoxious a character he is. So it goes, "I do wish to my semen rectumed chum, the rint boy, would stop slavering in my fucking ear. There's a set of VPLs, visible panty lines, and the chickie in front of us, and all my concentration is required to ensure a thorough examination is undertaken." So straight away the scene is set that he's a bit of a womanizer and obnoxious with it.
Yes.
Later on in that paragraph then, when a different girl blocks his view of the woman he's been looking at, and he says sarcastically to Renton, "There's a slim chickie," and Renton responds, "Fuck off, you sexist cunt." Sick Boy's response, "The fact that you use the term cunt in the same breath as sexist shows you display the same muddled, fucked up thinking on this issue as you do on everything else." Which is kind of difficult to argue with, because obviously you can argue at the time that cunt could be sexist.
Yes.
So I think there's great chemistry between Sick Boy and Renton in arguments, like they're like adversaries at times, even though they're friends. So it's kind of a case of keeping your friends close and enemies closer. I don't know, but they don't really get on very well in the book, you know what I mean? So it's just interesting. I think they mentioned that. I think they mentioned how they grow apart later in the book, that the fact that the mutual antagonism was kind of like a charade for the benefit of others, but it becomes so common and so that it actually became real, and they ended up properly hating each other, and they drifted apart. When Stevie is at the Hearts Hibs game after the game, he makes a comment which I think about footballing rivalries, which I think is there's a bit of sense in it. He describes football divisions as stupid and irrelevant nonsense, acting against the interests of working class unity, ensuring the bourgeoisie's hegemony went unchallenged.
Yeah.
And you can tell that Irvine Welsh has kind of socialist leanings, so maybe they're fighting amongst themselves on a working class board when they should be reuniting against tyranny, against the people in power. So obviously I'm a big football fan myself, but I could see the logic in that statement.
Yeah.
When Renton goes to visit Johnny Swan in the hospital. Johnny Swan asks him, "Are you still knobbing Kelly?" And Rinton's response, "I didn't like the way he asked this. I didn't like the way I responded." I just thought that was just the way that was put very well.
Yeah, that's right. There's a lot of, sort of bare, sort of naked honesty there, isn't there? It's sort of very simple. I didn't like the way he asked it. I didn't like the way I responded. And there's honesty in there, and that's good. It's good writing.
And you could see kind of the way Swanee and Rinton are drifting apart, and we can see him drifting away from the rest of the group, and that when Swanee's having banter talking about drowning the world in saliva back in '77 with the right idea, about saliva being a natural antiseptic, when he's trying to get Alison to do something for him, which we won't go into. And he was like, pity we all dried up, Rinton said. And Swanee says, "I too right, quieter now." There's kind of a gap has appeared between them, and it's finished brilliantly with, "It's time I wasn't here." So
I think that's Renton checking out of the heroin scene with the best of intentions. And then, of course, there's this ridiculous add-on which hardly fits at all when he goes off to London, and I mean, I go into it in my book. Welsh's Trainspotting was composed in two different periods. And the second period ends up when he's off to Amsterdam. But the first period, he's confused. He's heading in the wrong direction for home. When he gets to Leith Central Station, he should be heading towards New Haven rather than Loch End with Begbie. He's confused, he's disoriented, and he's muddled, but he decides to check out of the heroin scene, and he decides to check out of Leith as well. But it's inconclusive, and it isn't really a very satisfactory dramatic ending. And he was introduced to an editor who persuaded him to add some new material and end up with a different ending, and that's when they go to London and he sells the stuff on, and he's away with a few 16,000 quid on him or something, and he's on ferry to Amsterdam, and that's where they pick him up at the beginning of Porno. He's been in Amsterdam for 10 years.
The chapter where Davy Mitchell has the accident at his girlfriend Gail's house after a binder in Glasgow, at the Scottish Cup semi-final, I just love just the moment where I suppose the sheets have found their way over the breakfast table and the guests at them, his girlfriend's parents, and just one line, "I can't see our relationship developing any further now." I just think that's just a brilliant one line, and just kind of like, it kind of just sums it up.
Yeah.
Because it's a fairly good chance he could be right there. I would say that I think I'd give him even money on it not developing any further. There's no way back from that, really, is there?
No.
When Rinton is at the interview, and the interview is going well, and it's going too well because he's made an impression on the main guy, and he just goes, "Thank fuck for spotted dick." A fair assumption, considering as every other part of him is covered in zit. So the younger guy who's doing the interview, and he kind of nervously asks, "Can you explain the gaps between your employment jobs, your employment history?" And I just love Rinton's response by saying, "Can you explain the gaps between your words, you dose wee cunt?" You know.
So, I mean, that's the insolence that's just unbearable. I mean, you don't want to be in front of it, but it's funny to read about it.
But I think, just to clarify there, that line was actually said to himself. Yeah. He didn't say that in the
Sure.
Yeah, but it's just funny to, however, a guy who speaks his mind and speaks without thinking is Begbie. And one of my favorite parts of the book is when it's Matty's funeral and they're talking about the time they went down to Aintree for the Grand National, and Keith Chegwin, is it?
Yeah.
Cheggers? Yeah.
Cheggers, yeah.
Yeah. He's there interviewing people who are there for the racing and asking what it's like. And Matty was literally thinking, oh, this is stardom, you know, and he's there saying how great it is to be here in Grand National in Aintree, and here we are, we're having a great time. He just hands the microphone to Begbie, and Begbie straight out says, away and fuck yourself, you rag cunt, you know. And that Chegwin was crimson, like they had a 3-second delay on live radio to edit that stuff out. But I just love the description. I love the description when he says, like, we're down there for the racing, not to talk to some dose cunt on the radio. Yeah. And just this line, his expression was one of a man of affairs, bored of being hassled by the media for interview. I think that's fantastic. Like, you know.
Yeah. I mean, he's got some good perspectives, hasn't he? Evan Welsh. Trainspotting is the most speculative and innovative and urgent. And he's got all those qualities in Trainspotting. They're a bit mixed up, and you know, in many ways, it's not very well composed or very well considered literature, but it's got a big punch about it.
Yeah, absolutely, and it stays in the mind. You know, like I don't know, that makes me smile. Another scene which stays in the mind, and this is probably one of the more controversial scenes, is when Brinton somehow manages to hook up with his sister-in-law at his brother's funeral, which is so appalling, it's beyond words, you know, at a situation where his mother and father are in the house, the whole family are in the house. He's already incurred the ire of his Glasgow relatives for whistling the Foggy Jew, another Irish reference that I forgot to mention.
Yes.
Foggy Jew, that he very much took you can tell he definitely took the Catholic side or nationalist side in the war without going to tactics. And whistling the Foggy Jew, which is an Irish nationalist song from the 1916 Rising, was done with the intent of winding up.
Yeah, that's in the presence of the army officers.
Yeah, the army officers, and the orange uncles and that. There's two lines I think that kind of I enjoyed or found it was memorable, where he's made his entry, for want of a better term, but he was like, if Billy could see me now, but in a strangely reverential way, you know. Then when the aunt knocks on the door, when obviously he's under the pretense that Sharon, his sister-in-law, is getting sick in the toilet, and he's kind of helping her out and making sure she's okay. And the aunt says, are you seeing to her, Mark? And his response is, I am seeing to her. I panted as Sharon's groans grew louder. So it's just kind of, you could almost say that slapstick in itself, you know what I mean?
Well, yeah.
I am seen to her. Yeah. I loved as well Rinton's description of Begbie at the start of the chapter when we first properly get to know Begbie, and this line that friendship with Begbie was excellent preparation for embarking on a relationship with a woman. He taught you sensitivity and awareness of the other people's changing needs. And he just makes the point that there was a lot of problems with Begbie, but the main problem, I suppose, was you could never relax in his company, that a slight shift in his perception could change you from great mate to persecuted victim. That's, you know what I mean? And the trick was to indulge him without being overtly crawling and being a sap, you know? So he's quite a temperamental character, Begbie, you know what I mean?
Yes.
A vicious character, but I enjoy that. Tommy in West Granton, I think this term is quite poignant. I think kind of his friends will decline in their numbers as his needs increase. He's dying of HIV, the inverse or perverse mathematics of life.
Yeah.
And the final one I have down here is Sick Boy and Rinton when they argue. If you can't win the finer detail of argument, rubbish is context. And I think I know a few people who use that tactic, and it struck a chord. That's why I have it mentioned. That line I was just going to say about Rinton and Sick Boy growing apart. Their mutual antagonism, once a joke, a performance for the benefit of others, had slowly become, through being ritualized in that way, a mundane reality. And that can happen. That can happen as well. So when you're used to that,
there's some sharp observations of human relationships there. You know, young people who have been school friends, but they're parting company. Yeah, yeah, growing up and discovering life. I mean, Sick Boy's going off to be a child of Thatcher. Begbie's heading off for prison. Sick Boy, Spud's heading for, I don't know, a life of addiction. And Renton's going to make out in Amsterdam, you know, and they're sort of diverging. But there's some sharp observations on the road to getting there.
Is there any part you'd like to share?
No, I think you've picked out some good ones there. I mean, okay, just one thing. When Spud is, we go and meet at the shore, that's where we met. And he says, the heat man is hot. That's the only way you can really describe it. Ken. I think that's just a lovely piece of Spud speak.
Yeah. He's not the most articulate man on occasion, but he can surprise us in other ways. He can be quite
yes,
sharp.
he has. In some of the episodes, falls out of character. Yeah, and when he's getting on with he's a classic comic in the easy recruitment section. What is it called? What's it called? And then in the park afterwards. Yeah, but I mean, yeah, these are most of these characters, they were composed in the two periods of writing in the book, and there's a jolt between them. You know, Sick Boy hardly appears in the first period of the first generation of episodes, but Evan Welsh realizes that he needs to develop the character of Sick Boy to play opposite Renton in the second generation of episodes, which are spliced throughout the book, and they run alongside and they run parallel. There's one point in my book in which I say that you can call Trainspotting cubist literature, if you like. If a Picasso portrait can have square breasts and eyes where they shouldn't be, Irvin Welsh can have episodes which are out of a chronological order, a narrative order, and characters acting out of character. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It ties in brilliantly, and it all fits in brilliantly together. It's just an absolute masterpiece of a book. Just like your own one, Tim. A must-have for any fan of the book. Trainspotting, an excellent analysis, encyclopedia book I really enjoy reading in wider context. That book is still available from Lua Press. I'm going to put the link in the video description.
That's very kind.
Yeah, and it's definitely worthwhile reading. So try to support him and buy that if you can. It's well worth a tenner. I'm also going to put the link for, as I mentioned earlier, about the Trainspotting presentation for the Facebook page. It's on after 12th November. I'll put the actual link.
Right. That's right. Thank you. That's kind of you.
After. I'd also like to take the opportunity there as well. There's a couple of fellow Irish men who are also running an Urban Welsh teamed podcast called Junk Dilemmas, and it just reminds me of one of the lines in the final Junk Dilemmas episode in Trainspotting, that there's never any real dilemmas with junk. You only come when you run out, which is always quite sharp as well. But it's a very good podcast. They literally do a different book every week.
Oh yeah.
Of Urban Welsh, and analyze it, ratings, connecting lines, where they analyze characters who appear in different books.
That's interesting.
It's two guys as well. They're sitting down, having a few drinks, and just the banter flows. It's really good. I really enjoy listening to it myself. Junk Dilemmas, I'll put a link as well in the video description for that as well. So I'd like for you to be a regular guest, Tim. I think we've only scratched the surface with what we've done so far with the Irish side of things. I think we've some we have some potential more great chats about Urban Welsh and Trainspotting. So hopefully we'll have you on again.
That's kind of you. I'd look forward to that. Thank you very much, Patrick. Very kind. Thank you for having me. I've enjoyed the chat.
All right, Tim. So thanks a million for coming on this evening. It's great seeing you again, even virtually. I hope you've enjoyed the show, guys. Again, please don't forget to like, subscribe, click the notifications bell so you won't miss any future videos and updates to the channel. So thanks again, once again, for joining us, and we'll see you next time on the Parley with Padre podcast. Good night. God bless.
Cheerio from Leith.